Larry Donnell Andrews was born in 1954. One of his earliest and most violent memories was when he was 10 years old and he watched a man bludgeoned to death for 15 cents in the West Baltimore projects where he lived with his abusive mother. "I made up my mind that I would never be a victim. I would never be the prey. I'd be the hunter," Andrews said of the incident. In a 2009 interview, he told The Independent, "The word future wasn't even in my vocabulary, because I didn't know if I'd be alive or dead tomorrow. They had a bet in my neighborhood that I wouldn't reach 21. Although the neighborhood was riddled by gang warfare, Andrews quickly learned that having a lone wolf mentality made him less likely to be caught for his criminal activities. "When I was coming up, one of the biggest drug dealers in the city would always tell me a real man stands alone," Andrews said. Donnie liked working by himself. He had a few friends who he was able to feel comfortable hustling with, and they would have to know what he was doing by just a look, and everything needed to be perfect when robbing people. But despite that mindset, Andrews would be busted for the first time at 16 years old on a path toward 18 more arrests for various misdemeanors and felonies. Eventually, he decided to focus on a criminal endeavor which became a trademark for Omar Little's character in The Wire, which was robbing drug dealers. Donnie said, "I might get $200 or $300 robbing a bar, but from a drug dealer I could get $200,000 or $300,000. There was an incident where he went to rob a stash house and they wouldn't open the door. So he yelled, 'If I've gotta come in there, something bad's gonna happen.' The window opened and they threw the drugs out." In The Wire, Michael K. Williams' character Omar had a similar scenario where he said to open the door before he huffs and puffs, and they threw the drugs out of the window. In one of the most craziest moments in the series, Omar is forced to flee an ambush gone wrong, after Chris, Snoop and Michael get the drop on him, by jumping out of a fourth-story window. Donnie Andrews is also in the scene with Michael K. Williams and plays one of his allies who is ultimately gunned down. Although some thought when he jumped out of the window it was unrealistic, Andrews was not only adamant that this actually happened to him, but that he had actually jumped from a higher floor. He actually jumped out of the 6th floor. Donnie said, "It was either lead poisoning or take my chances. I did it without thinking. If I'd thought about it, I might have taken the lead poisoning." During the 1980s, Donnie Andrews' judgment became clouded by heroin addiction. He progressed from robbery to accepting contracts for murder at the behest of drug lord Warren Bordley. Bordley also recruited Reggie Gross, a former heavyweight boxer known for facing Mike Tyson, to join as another potential hitman. The fee was set at $5,000 along with 2 ounces of heroin. During this time, the Bordley gang exerted violent control over the Lexington Terrace Poe Homes public housing projects, viewing Zachary Roach and Rodney Touche Young as rivals. After Gross had already taken one life, he and Andrews used Mac 11 machine pistols to carry out the killings of Roach and Young, an event infamous as the Gold Street Murders. Once Reggie's Uzi went off, Zach jumped up and it was a spontaneous reaction on my part, Andrews had said. "I just fired and, as he ran up the street, he tripped and fell. I went to give him the coup de grace and he looked up at me. I looked him in the eye and, before he died, he asked me, 'Why?' It was like I was frozen in time. I thought, why? This guy looks just like me. He could have been my brother, my son, my father. And why for drugs? Because somebody shot Warren in the foot. Why? It stuck with me, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I'm trying to figure out why to this day." The murder inquiry was led by Baltimore detective Ed Burns, who later became known as a co-creator of The Wire. Discussions ensued regarding the identities of those involved and the motives behind the killings. However, no one stepped forward, and there was no physical evidence linking Andrews to the murders. Burns recognized a sense of morality beneath Andrews' tough exterior. He understood Andrews had the capacity for violence, but not of this magnitude. Thus, Burns pressed him for information. "Ed followed me to the parking lot and said, 'I can give you a second chance at life,' Andrews had said. This required Andrews admitting to committing the double murder and agreeing to wear a recording device to gather critical intelligence on Baltimore's drug trade. In return, he expected a 10-year prison term instead of the consecutive life sentences received by his accomplice, Reggie Gross. Others in his position typically bargained for reduced time, recalled prosecutor Charles Sheeler. Donnie's motivation was repentance. Despite Andrews' full cooperation, the district attorney went back on the promised leniency, resulting in a life sentence. Facing a future behind bars, Andrews resolved to first overcome addiction, seek spiritual solace, and work towards redemption. He aimed to guide others towards a righteous path upon their release from prison. Andrews served 17 years in prison and was released in 2005. His first job outside of prison was becoming an official consultant on The Wire. As an actor, Andrews made his first appearance on the show helping Omar tape magazines to his chest in order to avoid being stabbed while in prison. In addition to an advisory role on the show, Andrews also continued his gang outreach and founded a non-profit organization called Why Murder, which reflected the last words of the man who he had killed. In 2012, Donnie Andrews passed away after complications stemming from a heart procedure.